$1 trillion. It's a number so big it's almost meaningless. It's more than the entire economic output of most nations. More than the GDP of Switzerland, of Sweden, of Taiwan. Yet on August 2nd, 2018, one company, born in a garage, reached that impossible number. Apple became the first publicly traded U.S. company to be worth $1 trillion. Though, to be fair, a Chinese company, PetroChina, had a brief, wild ride past that mark about a decade earlier. But this isn't a story about a company that just got lucky. It's not about one great product. It's a story about a war fought over 4 decades in boardrooms, in factories, and on the world's biggest stages. This is the story of how a company on the brink of failure didn't just survive. It built an unshakable empire that has giants like Microsoft, Amazon, and even the new king of AI, Nvidia, playing by its rules. This is the $1 trillion code that Apple wrote and that everyone else is still trying to crack. To understand how Apple conquered the world, you first have to understand how close it came to dying. The story of the $1 trillion empire doesn't begin with success. It begins in the mid-1990s with a company in complete chaos. After co-founder Steve Jobs was forced out in 1985, Apple entered a lost decade. It was a war for its own soul. The company that had launched the Macintosh, a machine that promised to change the world, was now selling a confusing mess of products. There were Performas, Quadras, Centris models, a dozen different beige boxes with no clear vision. The strategy was scattered, the innovation had stalled, and the finances were in a death spiral. By 1997, the situation was dire. The company was bleeding money and its market share had collapsed. In a now famous moment, Dell CEO Michael Dell was asked what he'd do if he were in charge of Apple. His answer was brutal. I'd shut it down and give the money back to the shareholders. He wasn't just being dramatic. Insiders at the time, and even Jobs himself later, claimed the company was just 90 days away from total bankruptcy. It was on life support, a fallen icon. And then, in a move born of desperation, Apple made a final gamble. It bought a company called Next, not just for its technology, but for the man who founded it, Steve Jobs. His return was electric. Jobs wasn't the same impulsive young man who'd been exiled a decade earlier. He was focused, ruthless, and had a crystal clear vision. He famously gathered his top executives and drew a simple 2x2 grid on a whiteboard. 2 columns, consumer and pro. 2 rows, desktop and portable. He declared that Apple would make just 4 products. Everything else was canceled. It was a shocking act of simplification, but it was more than that. It was a declaration of war on complexity. It was the first critical step in rewriting the company's DNA. Jobs wasn't just there to save Apple. He was there to rebuild it into a weapon. With the product line gutted and the company refocused, Jobs needed to do something even more important. Remind the world what Apple stood for. He did it with 2 words: think different. The 1997 ad campaign wasn't about a product, it was a manifesto. It featured icons like Albert Einstein, Martin Luther King Jr., and Mahatma Gandhi, the crazy ones, the misfits, the rebels. Apple was positioning itself not as a computer company, but as a tool for people who wanted to change the world. It was a marketing masterstroke that reestablished the brand's rebellious, creative soul. And then came the proof. In 1998, Apple launched the iMac. In a sea of boring, beige PC towers, the iMac was a revelation. It was a brightly colored, all-in-one, translucent bubble of a computer. It ditched the floppy drive and was one of the first major computers to heavily feature a new connector called USB, helping push it into the mainstream. The industry thought they were nuts. The iMac was a sensation. It wasn't just a computer. It was a design statement. It was fun. It was easy to use. It saved the company. The iMac's success proved that Jobs' strategy wasn't just talk. People would pay a premium for products that were not only powerful, but also beautiful and simple. With Apple stabilized, Jobs set his sights on the next frontier: music. The digital music world at the time was the Wild West, a chaotic mess of illegal downloads and clunky MP3 players. Apple's answer was a 1-2 punch that would define the next decade. First, the iPod in 2001. Its promise was simple: 1,000 songs in your pocket. It was a marvel of engineering, but its true genius lay in its simplicity. The iconic click wheel was an intuitive masterpiece. But the hardware was only half the code. The other half was the iTunes Music Store, launched in 2003. For 99 cents, you could legally and easily buy a song. It was a simple idea, but it required incredibly complex deals with terrified music labels. Jobs' vision and force of will made it happen. The iPod and iTunes together created Apple's first true ecosystem. The hardware drove software sales, and the software made the hardware indispensable. You didn't just own an iPod, you were invested in an iTunes library. This was the blueprint. Apple wasn't just selling you a product anymore, it was building a prison for you, a beautiful, elegant prison you'd never want to leave. By 2007, Apple was a successful, profitable company. It had reinvented personal computing and the music industry, but its next move wouldn't just be a new chapter. It would be a completely new book. For years, the tech world had been dominated by giants like Microsoft, Nokia, and BlackBerry. They were the undisputed kings of computing and mobile phones. They were about to be overthrown. At the Macworld conference in January 2007, Steve Jobs walked on stage and delivered the most famous product introduction in history. Today, he said, "We're introducing 3 revolutionary products: a widescreen iPod with touch controls, a revolutionary mobile phone, and a breakthrough internet communications device." He repeated the list, the tension building. Are you getting it? These are not 3 separate devices. This is one device, and we are calling it iPhone. The iPhone was a declaration of war on the entire tech industry. It didn't just improve on the smartphone, it pointed to its extinction. While competitors were still focused on physical keyboards and clunky styluses, Apple delivered a magical sheet of glass that could be anything you wanted it to be. The incumbents didn't fall overnight, but the writing was on the wall. But just like with the iPod, the device itself was only part of the attack. The true masterstroke, the move that unlocked the trillion-dollar valuation, came a year later: the App Store. When the iPhone first launched, it had no third-party apps. But Jobs and his team quickly realized that the only way to make the iPhone truly essential was to unleash the creativity of developers around the world. The App Store, launched in 2008, did exactly that. Suddenly, your phone wasn't just for calls and email. It was a camera, a gaming console, a navigator, a bank, a movie theater. This was the lock-in. This was the ecosystem made impenetrable. Once you had bought hundreds of dollars worth of apps, music, and movies, switching to a competing Android phone became an expensive, painful choice. Apple had built its walled garden, and the walls were getting higher every day. The hardware was the price of admission. The software and services were the recurring taxes that kept you inside. This platform model was the core of the trillion-dollar code. Apple wasn't just in the business of selling phones anymore, it was in the business of owning the customer. The death of Steve Jobs in 2011 sent a shockwave through the world. Many believed that without its visionary leader, Apple was finished. The question on everyone's mind was, what now? The answer came in the form of a quiet, unassuming man who had been the architect of Apple's operational might: Tim Cook. Where Jobs was the visionary artist, Cook was the operational genius. He was the master of the machine that built the art. While Jobs was on stage wowing the world, Cook was in the background, building one of the most sophisticated and ruthless supply chains in history. He had honed his skills for years, squeezing every penny of cost and every second of inefficiency out of the manufacturing process. When Cook took over as CEO, the skepticism was immense. He wasn't a product guy like Jobs, but he didn't need to be. The trillion-dollar code had already been written. Cook's job was to execute it at an unimaginable scale. And that's exactly what he did. Under Cook, Apple's growth became a force of nature. He broadened the product line with massive new hits, like the Apple Watch and AirPods. These weren't just accessories, they were brilliant additions to the ecosystem, making that walled garden even stickier. AirPods, once mocked, became a cultural phenomenon and a multi-billion-dollar business on their own. But Cook's other stroke of genius was financial. He turned Apple into a cash-generating leviathan. With hundreds of billions of dollars in the bank, he initiated a massive capital return program. This meant two things: dividends for shareholders, and more importantly, enormous share buybacks. Share buybacks are simple. The company uses its cash to buy its own stock, reducing the number of shares out there. This automatically increases the earnings per share, which tends to make the stock more attractive to investors. It was a relentless, methodical campaign to leverage Apple's unprecedented profitability. While Wall Street obsessed over the next hit product, Cook was quietly expanding the services division. Apple Music, iCloud storage, App Store commissions, Apple Pay. These weren't one-time hardware sales. They were recurring, high-margin revenue streams that made the company's earnings more predictable and valuable. On August 2nd, 2018, this combination of massive product scale, ecosystem lock-in, and shrewd financial engineering finally pushed Apple over the line. The company Jobs saved and Cook scaled was now worth $1 trillion. Reaching $1 trillion put Apple in an exclusive club. But it didn't stay that way for long. The late 2010s and 2020s saw other giants breach the barrier, but each took a radically different path, highlighting just how unique Apple's code truly is. First came Apple's old rivals. Amazon hit the mark in late 2018, not just by dominating e-commerce, but through the brute force of its cloud computing arm, AWS. Microsoft followed in 2019, achieving its own renaissance by shifting its focus from Windows to the enterprise cloud with Azure. Both built massive platforms, but their empires were sprawling and business-focused, a stark contrast to Apple's tightly controlled, consumer-centric fortress. Then there's the old guard, Berkshire Hathaway. Led by Warren Buffett, the conglomerate became the first non-tech company to cross the $1 trillion threshold in 2024. Its journey was the polar opposite of Apple's. It was a story of patient, value-based investing, slowly accumulating a diverse portfolio of insurance, railroad, and utility companies. Berkshire's path was one of accumulation, not disruption. It was the tortoise in a world of hares. But the most dramatic challenger is Nvidia. As of late 2025, it's the most valuable company in the world, with a market cap that has rocketed past $4 trillion. Its ascent was explosive, fueled by the AI revolution. While it took Apple about 38 years from its IPO to reach its first trillion, Nvidia did it in around 24. The next jump was even more stunning. Apple took over 500 days to go from 1 to 2 trillion. Nvidia did it in about 180. Nvidia's code is different. It's not about a consumer ecosystem. It's about selling the picks and shovels for the AI gold rush. Their GPUs are the foundational hardware for this new economy. The battle between Apple and Nvidia is a battle of philosophies. Apple's closed, vertically integrated consumer empire versus Nvidia's more open, developer-focused platform that powers everyone else's AI dreams. Apple built a walled garden. Nvidia is building the engines for an entirely new universe. Apple's $1 trillion code has proven incredibly resilient. As of late 2025, its market cap hovers around a staggering $4 trillion, a testament to its powerful model. But no empire is immortal, and Apple's fortress has vulnerabilities. The first is geopolitical. The company's operational genius has been heavily dependent on manufacturing in China. That relationship, once a source of strength, is now a significant risk amid rising global tensions. The second is regulatory. Governments around the world are circling. Antitrust scrutiny is laser-focused on the App Store, with regulators questioning the fairness of its commission structure and its absolute control. A major legal defeat could crack the very foundation of Apple's high-margin services business. And finally, there is the relentless demand for innovation. The law of large numbers is a powerful foe. How do you find growth when you're already this big? The iPhone is a mature product. The company needs its next act. Apple is betting billions on the Vision Pro and the dawn of spatial computing, hoping it can become the next revolutionary platform. But it's a high-stakes gamble in a crowded field. The world is changing. Many argue that this new era of AI is being defined by Nvidia and Microsoft, not Apple. The strategies that build these corporate empires are a ruthless game of chess. If you want to see more breakdowns of the wars that define business and technology, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Let us know in the comments which company's code you want us to crack next. Apple's journey to $1 trillion and beyond wasn't an accident. It was the result of a precise, multi-decade strategy. The $1 trillion code is a combination of 4 key things: a visionary's obsession with product perfection, a ruthless focus on building an impenetrable ecosystem, an operator's genius for scaling production to an unimaginable degree, and a masterful financial strategy that turned colossal profits into ever-increasing shareholder value. It was a war of strategy and vision, won by a company that learned to be as ruthless as it was creative. Apple wrote the definitive code for building a 21st century empire. But in a world now being reshaped by the raw power of artificial intelligence, the question remains: who will write the code for the next one?